My name is Terry. I'm standing in the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors behind me. My hands are steady as I hold my briefcase, but my heart is pounding. Inside this briefcase lies the truth that my family has been trying so hard to bury. There they are, my parents and my older brother, sitting across the room. They're dressed in their finest, looking every bit the part of the wealthy, successful family they've always pretended to be. When they see me, my mother gives me that same condescending look she's given me my whole life. It's a look that says I'm a nuisance, a disappointment. They think this is over, that I'll just roll over and give up the inheritance my grandfather left me. They have no idea what I've uncovered. It all started in a small town where my family was seen as the picture of perfection. My father, Henry, was a high-powered corporate executive. He was always in a suit, even on weekends, and his presence commanded respect. My mother, Victoria, was a socialite who spent her days at the country club, making sure our family image was spotless. And then there was my brother, Ethan. He was 2 years older than me and the golden child of the family. From the moment Ethan was born, it was clear that he was the apple of my parents' eyes. When he turned 16, my parents threw him a lavish party at the country club. The place was filled with people, there was a live band, and a huge cake. At the end of the night, my father presented him with a brand new sports car. Ethan was over the moon, and my parents beamed with pride. When it was my turn to turn 16, things were very different. I got a simple card and a gift certificate to a local bookstore. My mother told me they were short on cash because of Ethan's expensive private school tuition. I didn't complain. I just accepted it and went back to my part-time job at the local diner. I spent my high school years taking the bus to school while Ethan drove around in his fancy car with his friends. The difference in attention didn't stop there. If Ethan got a C on a test, my parents would hire a private tutor for him and spend hours helping him study. But when I got an A, they barely noticed. I would put my report card on the fridge, hoping for some recognition, but it would just get lost among the pictures of Ethan's achievements. My mother once told me that as a girl, I would get married and that Ethan needed to be prepared to support a family. It made me feel like my dreams and aspirations didn't matter. So, I stopped asking for help and started relying on myself. I worked hard at the diner, saving every penny I could. When I got into college, my parents said they couldn't help me financially. Ethan was in graduate school, and they said his education was a priority. I took out loans and got a second job at a library. I lived in a tiny, run-down apartment near the campus, eating ramen noodles most nights. But there was one person who saw me for who I was, my grandfather, George. He was a simple man, a retired carpenter. He had calloused hands and a kind heart. He didn't approve of the way my parents treated me. He would often make comments about how they were spoiling Ethan and ignoring me. Every Sunday, I would visit him at his small cottage on the outskirts of town. We would sit on the porch, drinking tea and talking. He would tell me stories about his life and give me advice. One day, I was crying because I was so overwhelmed with school and work. I asked him why my parents didn't love me. He held my hand and said, "Terry, charm fades, but grit lasts. You have grit. You're a hard worker, and that's worth more than all the fancy cars in the world." Then he went into his study and brought out a thick binder. He said, "People lie, but paper doesn't. You keep records of everything, Terry. Document your work, your achievements, and any promises made to you. It's your shield in this world." I took his words to heart and started keeping a notebook. I wrote down every pay stub, every email, and every important event. When my grandfather passed away at the age of 85, I was devastated. He was the only one who truly understood me. At the funeral, my parents put on a show of grief, wearing expensive black suits and crying loudly. Ethan was more interested in his phone than in saying goodbye to his grandfather. I sat in the back, wearing a simple black dress I bought at a thrift store, crying silently. A week later, we were summoned to the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. The office was in a tall glass building downtown. The conference room was filled with the smell of leather and polish. My parents and Ethan sat on one side of the table, looking confident. Ethan whispered to my mother that he expected to get the family's vintage watch collection and the beach house. The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, began to read the will. To my son, Henry, and his wife, Victoria, I leave my investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $500,000. My parents smiled and squeezed each other's hands. To my grandson, Ethan, I leave the family beach house. Ethan fist pumped the air. Then, Mr. Thompson paused and looked at me. To my granddaughter, Terry, I leave the entirety of my educational and growth trust, which, after 50 years of savings and compound interest, is currently valued at $1,500,000. The room went silent. My parents' faces turned pale. Ethan let out an angry scoff. My father stood up and shouted, "This must be a mistake. Terry can't handle that kind of money. She's just a waitress." Mr. Thompson calmly explained that my grandfather had revised the will 6 months ago and that it was legally binding. Over the next few days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. My mother called, begging me to come to dinner and talk. She said they were just shocked and that they wanted to work things out. I was naive enough to believe her. I drove to their mansion in the suburbs. The house was as immaculate as ever, with a perfectly manicured lawn. When I walked in, the smell of a delicious meal filled the air. My mother hugged me, but it felt forced. We sat down at the dining table, which was set with the finest china. My father poured wine, and Ethan was sitting there, smiling. For a while, we just talked about the weather, and I started to relax. Then, the doorbell rang. My father said it was just a friend. A man walked in, Mr. Jenkins, their family lawyer. He was carrying a briefcase. My stomach dropped. He slid a document across the table to me. It was titled Family Asset Management Agreement. My father explained that it was for my protection. He said I had no experience with money and that they were worried I would squander it. The agreement stated that I would transfer the entire $1,500,000 into a family trust managed by my father and Ethan. In return, they would pay off my student loans and give me a monthly allowance of $3,000. I was furious. I told them that my grandfather left the money to me for a reason. Ethan threatened me, saying that if I didn't sign, they would contest the will in court. They would claim that my grandfather was mentally incompetent when he changed the will, and it would tie up the money for years. I refused to sign. I stood up and said, "Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing. He left it to me because he knew you would try to take it." Ethan stood up and said, "If you walk out that door, you're no longer part of this family." I grabbed my purse and walked out, feeling a mix of anger and determination. A few days later, I was served with a legal petition for conservatorship. The document claimed that I was financially incompetent and mentally unstable. It was full of lies. They said I had a history of reckless spending, when in fact, I had always been frugal. They said I had severed ties with my family support system because I refused to be robbed. I was devastated. I lost my job at the diner because my manager said the legal dispute was a liability. I was alone, with no one to turn to. But then I remembered my grandfather's binder. I opened it and found a section marked, "In case of emergency." Inside, there was a copy of the full trust agreement. I started reading it carefully. I had been going to law school at night, but my parents didn't know. They thought I was just taking general classes at the community college. I had passed the bar exam a few months ago but hadn't told anyone. I found a clause in the trust agreement that stated if any beneficiary contested the will, they would forfeit their share of the inheritance. I knew this was my chance. I called my friend, Jake, who was also a lawyer. I explained the situation to him, and he agreed to help me. 2 weeks before the court date, a courier delivered an envelope to my apartment. It was an amended motion from my parents' lawyer. Inside was a document titled Addendum to Trust dated last year. It stated that my grandfather wanted all assets to be managed by my father for the benefit of the entire family. At the bottom was my grandfather's signature. I was suspicious. The paper looked different from the ones my grandfather used. I took it to a forensic document examiner, Dr. Lewis. He examined the document and determined that it was a forgery. The paper was a modern type that didn't exist when the document was supposed to be signed, and the signature was a tracing. I also did some investigating of my own. I found out that Ethan's business had failed, and he was in debt for over $400,000. My parents had been using their retirement savings to keep him afloat. They had also taken out a second mortgage on their house, and they were on the verge of foreclosure. Now, here I am in the courtroom. The judge, Judge Anderson, enters the room. Mr. Jenkins starts his speech, talking about how my parents just want to protect the family assets. He presents the fake affidavits about my supposed incompetence. When it's my turn, I stand up and say, Your Honor, the petitioners claim I am incompetent, but this is a blatant lie. More importantly, this entire petition is a violation of the trust. I direct the court's attention to Section 8, subsection C of the trust agreement, the no contest clause. The judge reads the clause and looks at Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins tries to argue that the clause doesn't apply, but the judge is firm. This clause applies to any legal action attempting to alter the distribution of assets, she says. Mr. Jenkins then pulls out the forged addendum. I object, stating that it is a forgery. I present Dr. Lewis's report to the court. The judge reads it and her face turns cold. She looks at my parents and says, I find that the petitioners have committed fraud and violated the no contest clause. Their rights to any inheritance are hereby forfeited. My mother starts to cry, and Ethan looks like he's about to be sick. The judge also refers the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into fraud, forgery, and perjury. The judge then looks at me and says, Miss Terry, the entirety of the trust is yours. Do you have any requests? I look at my broken family and say, No, Your Honor. I just want to go home. It's been a year since that day in court. My parents lost their house, and they moved into a small apartment. Ethan filed for bankruptcy. They've tried to contact me, but I've blocked their numbers and returned their letters unopened. I used the inheritance to pay off my student loans and bought a small house with a porch, just like my grandfather's. I adopted a dog named Hope. I opened my own law firm, specializing in elder law and trust litigation. Every day, I help people who are being bullied by their families. I tell them to keep their receipts, document everything, and never let anyone take advantage of them. I've found a new kind of happiness, a quiet one. It cost me my family, but I've kept my dignity and myself. And as I sit on my porch, watching the sunset, I know that my grandfather would be proud of me.